All right, so our next speaker for the day is Mr. Jean-Michel Wu, client partner and head of consumer and retail practice Asia Pacific at Pedersen and Partners. Mr. Jean has some perceptive insights on how we can find joy and happiness through integrating career with our personal life. Now, John definitely deserves a great introduction, right? So that's why I'm going to hand it over to Mr. JM to take over the session for today.
How to integrate your career with your personal life and generate happiness. Hello, and a warm welcome to all. My name is Jean-Michel, JM for short. I would like to take you on a journey of discovery. It's a path I'm still on and hopefully will be for the rest of my life. Trying to get that balance between my career and personal life, whilst also remembering to remain happy throughout. I've personally had to deal with it. But as I go through this talk, please also ask yourself, what does it mean to you? So how did I get here? Well, before becoming an integral coach, I had spent 25 years within human resources in Asia, where I worked as the talent leader for large companies like Ogilvy, McCann World Group, and then finally WPP. I would say I've been extremely fortunate to have experienced this career. However, I had always felt that there was always something more to life than just where you work and what you do. We are all intricately linked to each other. In fact, we are connected to everything. We are all interconnected. In Buddhism, this is described through the term interdependence. Everything depends on everything else for its existence. We can see this by considering the most basic thing that we do, breathing. Breathing keeps us alive, yet we cannot breathe alone. Our ability to breathe depends in an interconnected way on the world around us. The trees and plants use sunlight and carbon dioxide to produce the oxygen that we breathe. As we exhale, we in turn contribute to the carbon dioxide they need to produce more oxygen. This interdependent relationship with our surrounding world is a metaphor for everything in our lives. Our survival, as well as our happiness, relies on others. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, in fact, our very existence depends upon others. If we don't respect this fact, we cannot find true happiness. Our culture has moved into a phase where the individual is seen as more important than the community. We celebrate self-empowerment. A lot of the inputs we've received through advertising, social media, and even music tell us it's all about you. The focus now is on self-identity, and this seems to have made us feel rather lonely. Many children and teenagers grow up today with wild ambitions where the plan is simply to become rich and famous. Celebrities are seen as gods, and typical childhood wishes to become a pop star, a footballer, or a Kardashian. It's perfectly natural to be drawn to something that feels empowering, but perhaps we tend to look in places where we are ultimately unsatisfied. The more wrapped up in the self we become, the further away we move from genuine happiness. The self is run by desire and loathing. Those habits simply create more of themselves where nothing is ever good enough or feels safe enough, and this makes it impossible to achieve sustainable happiness. It also has permeated the worlds of self-help and mindfulness, with a desire to become the best you can achieve, complete self-actualization, and so on. Though this, we can easily fall into the trap of perpetually grasping after the illusionary self or well-being, leading to frustration. Who is the self anyway? If we were to investigate, we might find that there is no separate, independent, autonomous entity that we can actually call the self. If we explore who we really are, what is our identity, are we our own bodies? If you think about it, our bodies come from others, from the cells of our parents, the nutrients in the womb, and all the food that we eat. And what we eat comes from others too. What then in the body is the part that we truly own? Is the self really in the body? If so, where in the body are we located? If we were to lose an arm, of course there'd be a physical difference, but would the self reduce or diminish by corresponding amount? Is the self in the mind? If we examine our consciousness, we simply find a stream of instants, none of which can be pinned down as us. The moment is dead. The future is yet to come. And where is the present? As soon as we pin it down, it's gone. It already is a past moment. Even the observer, the parts of the mind that seems to be aware when we meditate, is not the self. Just as we can see but cannot touch the sky, we can experience observing but cannot identify an observer. The self is simply then a concept. We only exist in relation to others, and until we honor that, we will always feel as if something is missing. In modern times, we all want to be unique and special. Our uniqueness, however, is really a product of everyone and everything. We are very interested in defining who we are, but the individual can only be defined in relation to others. Examples of this are leaders and celebrities. They depend on having an audience. Those who have power over others need those others. The famous require other people to make and keep them famous. They are in many ways enslaved to their public. It is an independent relationship. Our happiness, our survival, our very existence depends on others, and others depend on us, no matter who we are. If we tap into and acknowledge and understand this interconnection, then a positive feeling can arise towards the world at large, and that feeling is gratitude. Our culture does not particularly promote gratitude. We're conditioned to look at what's missing in our lives so that we feel compelled to try to obtain more, rather than being content and grateful for what we already have. We're encouraged to compete and win, through which our relationships can become quite transactional, constantly assessing what others can do for us. By not recognizing how much others contribute to our very existence, we easily fall into the traps of selfishness and unkindness. If, on the other hand, we begin to feel grateful, it can make us feel closer to everyone else. And that will create a sense of responsibility, just as in a family unit. To find genuine, enduring happiness, it's helpful to feel gratitude and to honor the interconnection between everyone. Otherwise, we just become entrenched in a selfish mindset, which gives rise to more desire and more loathing. An openness to our connectivity and the compassion which can arise through that are much more aligned with our natural state. We all have a natural capacity to feel connected. We see this in children and how they respond to others. If a child sees another child laughing or crying, they will often join in. Children are very open. They will walk up to others with a few barriers. They're less self-conscious than adults, and they have a natural impulse to connect. This tendency diminishes as we grow. But even as adults, we're naturally inclined to find great joy in a sense of community. We like to laugh in groups, and if I yawn, you will yawn too. Deep in our very being, we do wish to have a connection. When we see others in pain, a mirroring effect occurs within our brains. Our corresponding pain centers are activated, which indicates that our brains are wired for empathy. We also have a neurological basis for kindness. When we do something kind, there is an activation in the brain's reward system, which then produces chemicals, which makes us feel good. Without this hardwired kindness, we would not actually have survived as a species. We are programmed to reach out and help each other. However, stress is one of the most powerful blockers of our natural kindness and connectivity. When we are stressed, our minds tend to shrink and we have no space to think of others. We have so much in common. We all want to be happy and free from suffering. Yet our busy lives can make us feel separate from each other.
Many aspects of modern life separate us from being connected. The resources we draw upon for our happiness feel artificial and unsatisfying when the focus is on externals, such as how we look and what we have. Living in an era of competition and comparison inhibits our natural sense of connection and engenders isolation. Life becomes a battle to be won. The phrase, to get ahead, implies having to race against others. Consumer culture requires us to think as an individual rather than for the whole, and it's that separation that keeps the wheels turning. We look out for number one, but at what cost? Next slide, please. Nowadays, our experience of connection is often reduced to the internet, usually via social media. But the more connected we've become, the more isolated we've grown from those around us. Through this type of interaction, our connections can often remain quite shallow. When we amass friends like numbers, we scroll through those connections automatically, clicking like on photos and then scrolling on. But this almost mindless act doesn't give us a sense of being in a real relationship or feel like true sharing. Sometimes we go through our social media feeds and we tap like on everything as a tour of duty, as if doing our homework. Instagram even tells us you're all caught up. We also feel more interested in what's happening on the other side of the world than it is right in front of us. Perhaps that feels safer, as it requires less from us emotionally. We can find it hard to be fully present in our relationships. In some families, individuals take their meals at different times, so they don't have to encounter each other, or they sit hunched over, lost in their phones while at the dining table. Next slide, please. Our lack of understanding regarding interdependence has led us to severely harm the environment. We have a limitless desire for comfort, and our greed and levels of consumption have caused a serious crisis on our planet. Our desire goes completely unchecked and is in fact encouraged. We don't behave in a way that reflects how connected everything is, and thus we're reckless. Our problem lies in thinking that happiness comes from material objects. Those objects aren't inexhaustible, whereas our desire is. Perhaps we have a habit of taking long, luxurious showers, while many people across the world have nothing to drink or no access to clean, safe water. Being more mindful of this could help save lives. All that is needed is to become more aware and careful with our resources. Who owns the world resources anyway? Surely we all do, equally. If we can wake up to interdependence, it will help us want to share. Sustainable living requires us to change the mindset concerning where we think happiness actually comes from. Simply recycling our waste, while important, is not enough. What needs to change is our level of greed. This will only happen when we understand that greed does not lead to happiness. Next slide, please. We urgently need to realize that happiness comes from inside, which is something boundless and limitlessly recycling. Meditation in the 21st century is very much about saving our planet through changing our minds. If we don't work on this, and even if we do think that happiness comes from the things around us, quite soon there won't be anything left to make us happy anyway. We are now in crisis, and we need to wake up. If we change our inner attitude and learn to feel content, then and only then can the earth support us. Next slide, please. Based on this shift in thinking, we can act mindfully, and we should feel confident that what we do. Using mindful steps to save our resources will definitely be a benefit. It's not wise to think it's only me, so why bother? That kind of attitude causes people not to vote in elections, but we know that every action, like every vote, counts. We no longer have to see happiness as a competitive process. Does my happiness need to come at the cost of yours? Does your happiness take away my own? Is happiness like a cake with a finite number of slices, not enough to go round? If we think like that, happiness becomes like a war to be won. In fact, the best foundation for a successful life is contentment, as only a content mind has the resources needed to bring about effective results. If we exist from a place of feeling without, we will not achieve very much, as we simply carry around the feeling of, I don't have, which then becomes our reality. When we don't act with wisdom, our interconnectedness can bring suffering to others. As we grow more global, it is essential that we become more aware of the effects we have on others. We tend to place ourselves at the center of everything, and that ego fixation in its extreme form can lead to either arrogance or self-hatred, where we say there's nobody quite as bad as me. Next slide, please. I would quickly just like to talk about Ladakh. It was a completely closed Western influence until 1975, when things dramatically opened up. The most shocking changes was the arrival of Western advertising and tourism. The region had been totally cut off. The people there had lived in their own Shangri-La bubble, and now the West was seeping into every aspect of their lives. This led to a number of problems. The most striking of which was the young people began to bleach their skin. Ladakhi teenagers were looking at white faces on television and on advertising billboards, head thrown back in laughter, sitting in fancy cars and drinking Coca-Cola with seemingly perfect lives. And they began to resent themselves. Sales of the Indian face cream Fair and Lovely went through the roof. The traditional subsistence economy had meant that all basic needs, including labor, had been provided without money. Now, with the arrival of tourists spending large amounts of money, everything was thrown out of balance and the local people began to feel poor. The story of Ladakh is a sad metaphor for our 21st century, where interdependence can become a type of infection. Rather than something supportive because we don't connect mindfully. Furthermore, it illustrates how encouraging the mindset of comparison acts like a poison, destroying contentness and invariably happiness. Everybody in this world wants the same thing, happiness and freedom from suffering. We're all together on one path. This really isn't any difference between us. On the surface, we have varied lifestyles, but our underlying aims are the same. It's a level playing field with a shared goal. If we stand back and think about it, it creates a feeling of togetherness, of community. Normally, when we meet a stranger, we feel disconnected, but as soon as we realize that we have something in common with them, we feel a connection and our attitude changes. When we understand that true happiness lies in the recognition of our connectivity, our internal chemistry completely changes, bringing about a stable sense of common security. We were born to connect. However, many people now live crammed next to each other like boxes, with thin partitions between each house, and yet perhaps they don't even know their neighbors' names. We go to sleep at night, and maybe our neighbor is also in their bed on the other side of that wall. It's as if we're breathing in each other's faces, with only a thin wall separating us, but we don't know each other. Huge areas of our society consist of people living just like that, next to each other, and everybody just looking after their own needs and those of their families. Next slide, please. Many of our social problems stem from this type of self-centered living, divorced from our natural state of connection. Our relationships suffer when we're selfish. There's often a type of quid pro quo, where we want others to love, yet love us back, That's the deal. Of course, that's an understandable wish, but there's a problem. In truth, we can give love, we can receive it, but we cannot take or expect love from someone. The subtext of I love you, you love me back, here are the rules, and if the rules are broken, the love will be cancelled, creates a sort of business transaction. Sometimes our very own identity becomes dependent upon loving us. There is often a perceived need for the other person to complete us, but that means we will never feel complete, as we are simply perpetuating an illusion of incompleteness. We struggle in relationships when there is a transmission of stress between the parties. There is a major problem in families, and when parents dump their stress on their children, that stress can become internalized. Next. Engaging with meditation is one of the kindest things you can do for yourself, for your relationships and family, and for society at large. It gives you the resilience through which you can take care of your own stress without passing it on to others. You can connect in a healthy way. You can break the chain of suffering. The youth today are tomorrow's leaders. And if we teach meditation to them at a young age, it can have a highly positive impact on future society. The Dalai Lama said, if every 8-year-old child in the world is taught meditation, we will eliminate violence from the world within 1 generation. It's important to make meditation inviting and even fun so that young adults form a positive association with it. It is also helpful to tailor the techniques, making them easier to understand. However, my main advice is for parents to lead by example. If you're a parent and meditating regularly, this sends a positive message to your children. Positioning meditation as something normal as your stress levels reduce, this will clearly have a beneficial effect on the children. Next slide. Empathy can be described as a form of emotional contagion, which is catching the suffering of another. While positive, connecting to others by empathy has its limitations. The most painful characteristic of empathy is the sense of helplessness or frustration. Seeing so much suffering in the world around us can easily lead us to feel overwhelmed and frustrated, as we think we're unable to do anything about it. We're just stuck with feeling bad. There are 3 common reactions to this frustration. Sometimes we become consumed by emotion. We cry and choke and feel overwhelmed. At other times, we might become angry with the frustration manifests as blame. But the most common reaction is just to become numb and cold. We simply don't know what to do about the problems of others, and so we shut down. This is the usual reaction when we talk past a homeless person on the street. We don't know what to do, we can't bear it, and we look down and continue on our way. Empathy, despite its limitations, is a starting point, but then compassion goes far deeper. Compassion means to understand others' pain, to cultivate the deep intention to help them, and then to help to translate that into action. It's about helping others in a deeper, more sustainable way. Compassion has selfless, unconditional, and limitless qualities, where empathy is bound up with expectations and requirements. Unconditional compassion implies no matter what. It leads us to connect with others, not because of when, but to love them just as they are. Compassion is something we can develop through working on our minds. It expands our empathy beyond limitations. Pro-social behavior is about compassion in action. It means to get out there and do something for others. We're talking here about the training of the heart. That is very different from experiencing random feelings of empathy, which arise as a reaction to the suffering of others, feelings that can simply be a type of pity or a drain on our resources. We can develop compassion as our core, our nature, our very being, rather than just being experiencing or an emotional reaction that switches itself on or off. Love and compassion are emphasized in the heart of every spiritual condition. And in meditation and mindfulness practices, they play a central role. With techniques for the development of stable, unconditional, limitless love and compassion, it's only through cultivating these qualities that we can help people, and as well as find the happiness which is inseparable from the happiness of others. In meditation, love is described as loving kindness, which means the heartfelt wish for others to experience true happiness. And compassion is the wish for others to be free from pain and suffering. But there's a further step we can develop to commitment to help others learn how to create the future happiness and how to be free from the causes for future suffering. Now, the use of the word for rather than of is deliberate. When we say the causes of happiness, there's an assumption that it's the things around us that are the causes. When on the other hand, we refer to causes for happiness, we're acknowledging that we ourselves create those causes through our thinking, which then leads to happiness or suffering. If we can create a dynamic link between our meditation practice and compassion, this will provide us with a clear path and direction. Compassion is the fastest way to happiness for ourselves and for the world around us. Through training in compassion, we can discover a happiness which is fully integrated with interdependence.
The science of spirituality, happiness. The German philosopher Schopenhauer asked the question, how can we determine whether a man is happy or unhappy? He defined true happiness as the complete satisfaction of all desires. You could say that the happiness of a person can be described mathematically as happiness equals the number of fulfilled desires divided by the total number of desires, whether fulfilled or unfulfilled. So if you have 10 desires and 5 are fulfilled, you have 50% happiness. If 10 are fulfilled, you have 100% happiness. The more desires you have, the harder it will be to fulfill them all, and so the less happy you will be. Happiness is inversely related to the number of desires. What happens when you have no desires at all? The denominator becomes 0. Anything you divide by 0 is infinity. If you have 0 desires, your happiness will be limitless. When we don't expect anything, we don't play games with ourselves and others. We don't manipulate others because we don't expect anything from anyone. How do we destroy our inner condition and our humanness? It is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2 that when desires are not fulfilled, there is disappointment. Disappointment leads to anger. Anger makes us lose our balance, and once we lose our balance, our mental equilibrium, we are destroyed and lose our humanness. Ramchandra of Shahjahanpur spoke about more and more of less and less. What is he talking about? He is talking of desires, more and more of less and less of desires. When you look at it in a mathematical way, you see so much wisdom in that simple statement. If you want to have infinite happiness, infinite bliss, then minimize your desires from more and more to less and less, and finally to 0. Make peace with yourself. My Lord, whatever you have given me and you continue giving me in the future, I'm happy. Does that mean you should not have an iPhone? You think about it.
We look forward to presenting Daji's thoughts on communication, on health. To learn more about Heartfulness meditation, you can visit our website at heartfulness.org.
Next slide, please. Moving in a slightly different direction, a more practical direction, I'd like to show us, well, I would have liked to have shown a small video about Mo Gaudat, who is the former chief business officer at Google X. He was at the top of his career and financially well off, and with a job many desire and a loving family. And yet, despite all of this, he wasn't happy. Like many others before him, Mo grappled with this question for years when suddenly losing his 21-year-old son during a routine procedure at a hospital in 2014. It deepened into a quest to discover what truly constitutes human happiness and how to stave off disappointment in life. By applying his analytical mind to the problem and examining key ideas from many of the world's religions, Gaudat finally arrived at his own happiness formula. And the reason why I brought Mo into this was because it's very similar with what Daji is also explaining in the previous video. Happiness is equal to or greater than the difference of where you see your life and your expectation of how your life behaves. And I think that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, JM. That was a very, very powerful presentation with some very powerful images. Our audience is especially inspired by this one quote that you shared: compassion is the key to happiness. And I believe that they will certainly follow this in their life going along. And our audience did find that your voice is really soothing and they want to hear more of it. So we're going to move into the audience Q&A. So yeah, our first question for you would be this: how do we help our peers to be more mindful and empathetic without sounding like they're preaching too much?
How would you... Can you say that again, please?
Sure. So our first question for the day would be, how do we help our peers to be more mindful and empathetic without sounding like they're preaching or they're sounding too preachy about it?
You mean in trying to ask them to become more mindful?
Exactly, and empathetic.
It's difficult to tell other people what to do, right? I think the whole idea about happiness is that it's really all inside you. And so it's up to you to make that leap in what you want to do. And so your actions are much louder than your words. I always find that if you live a life of happiness and mindfulness, then it's probably the best example that you can give other people. Your actions of kindness throughout what you do is going to be much more powerful than what you say.
Yeah, most certainly. And yeah, I actually agree with that. Sometimes telling somebody to do something can be a bit difficult. And if you were to just show it in the form of your actions, they definitely do speak louder than trying to be preachy, as the question says. So yeah, most certainly agree with that. Another question we have from the audience: what can we do daily to remain centered?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the idea of being centered is what does being centered mean? You know, what does that imply? And if it means you're being in the middle of something, there is a future and there is past and there is a present. And when you're living in the future, if you're thinking about things that you're planning in the future, or if you're reminiscing about things that has happened in the past, are you actually living? So the idea is, and this is something that I get a lot when I'm coaching people. The idea is that they have an incessant chatter in their mind about what they have done in the past and what they will do in the future, without really realizing what they're doing immediately. And the interesting thing is, when they're talking to me or having this chat with me, it feels like in some ways it's the first time that they've actually had that presence of being, maybe not 100%, but hopefully as close to 100%, where they can actually be who they are. And that is something that you can do all the time by just being recognizing and being aware of what you're doing. So if you're making a cup of coffee, you're focusing on that cup of coffee. You're not daydreaming about the next thing that's happening around the corner. The really, really interesting thing that I love about being in the present is that when you think about things in the past, it conjures up emotions of regret. Sometimes, I'm not saying it doesn't, but if you actually were to think about things in the past, it brings up quite negative emotions. And so if you don't want to feel those negative emotions, then don't think so much about things in the past, and focus on the things in the present. So it's really, really interesting, because it's not just in the past, it's also about the future. Your desires and your wants are normally about something that's in the future. And that too also leads to envy, jealousy, frustration. So the most sort of positive emotions actually derive from being present in the now. And those are feelings of compassion, feelings of love, feelings of empathy. So yeah, the very, very easy question is, the very easy answer is just try and live today, live for the now.
Yeah. There's this little saying that says, stop being depressed about the past and anxious about the future. Just try to live in the present and be receptive to every moment that comes in the present. So yeah, most certainly agree with that. So yeah, and our last question, I guess, for the session today, how do we show compassion and be helpful to people, and at the same time not be a doormat or a stepping stone? I think this is something I face as well, so really looking forward to your answer.
Okay, well, I'm not going to. It's a great question, firstly, but it's a big question. Not to be a doormat or a stepping stone. You don't want to be seen as someone taking advantage to you. Well, the question really is nothing about you. It's about the other person. As long as you know in your heart what you are doing is conjuring compassion for other people, then what they do to you is on them. It's not on you. So that idea should lead to some kind of confidence that you have in what you're doing. You shouldn't worry about what other people are doing. You should really be focusing on what you do. And because of that, and if you have that courage and conviction in being compassionate and helping others, then what other people will do should not be a concern of yours. So, it goes into areas of karma. It goes into areas but I think the really nice idea is if you think about a pail of water and dropping a stone in that water, you create ripples, and whatever you do, you're creating those ripples all the way around. What your actions are, what your actions do, creates all of those ripples, and it affects people around you. You might be doing it positively, you might unknowingly be causing it negatively. But the idea is if you're more aware of your actions, then whatever you do, you're doing them positively. So it's very hard to, you have to focus upon yourself rather than on what other people are doing. Someone's always going to have a negative aspect towards you, but that's their issue, not your issue.
Precisely. And thank you so much, JM, for collaborating with us. Our audience really liked your insights as well as your very, very soothing voice. And just like you've shared, we will continue to try to live in the present and treat our present as a present. So yeah, thanks.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.